Welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to our open book tour. A lot of you have asked me in the past, how do I find out about books that are available, the wonderful books that we have in the collection. And today we will hear from one of the answers. This is Alicia Bayley, who is herself a book artist, an artist actually in many, many media, an authority on books, and a book dealer. And we have dealt, though actually the first one wasn't free, and I always thought from dealers. That's what. But I have admired for a long time Alicia's work, and certainly appreciated her efforts as a supporter of books and a promoter and a dealer. So here from Colorado is Alicia Bayley.
Yeah. Thank you, Cynthia. So it's obviously a treat to be here. I'm sure that you're well aware, probably a well-traveled bunch, how really special this room is. And there's just not very many rooms in public institutions like this. I've seen private collections that have such an abundance, but people still wander the earth not knowing what book arts are. So I guess part of my role, self-appointed role in the world, is to spread the word. I had the good fortune in the early to mid 80s of working with a lot of book artists, although at the time I didn't make books, and that was at a place, Anderson Ranch Art Center in Snowmass, Colorado, and I was a photography assistant, and they had a new photo building, and the second level of the photo building is where they hosted the very few book artists who they had come through each summer. And so because I was a photo assistant, I got to work with the book artists that came. So although I didn't make books, I worked several times with Keith Smith, who's written several books on structures for book arts. Susan King, who is one of my heroines, all-time heroines, Susan K. Grant, Susan Scher, lots of Susans. So a lot of book artists that I got to work with. And Keith Smith I worked with several times, and he kept saying when he'd look at my work, "You're making books that hang on the wall, why don't you just make a book?" So I did, and that's kind of the end of that story. I've been making books ever since. Although not exclusively, I think about everything that I approach sort of as it is a book. I make boxes that I think most, that could more easily be described as Joseph Cornell kinds of boxes as well as books. But every year my production in other media is less, and I make more books. So I have a lot. I brought 50 books with me, which is far too many for us to look at with any thoughtfulness today. But I brought a few of my own books. So I'm going to start off and talk a little bit about my work, which is all over the place. I don't have a single style. And then use some of the ideas that I am excited about with my own work to kind of launch into just a few other topics that are well represented by the books that I brought with me. I welcome any questions that you have throughout, and because this is being filmed, it's maybe a little more formal or orderly than I often am, but I don't need to be orderly. The books will end up out on the table more than they are right now. The table might become a little too full. I just ask, I'm sure you all have clean and dry hands at the outset, and there's a few things I won't be passing around because they really don't pass around very well. But I'm here with these books because I want you to be able to see them. One bit of business I'm always forgetting about is, as Cynthia mentioned, I'm an artist book dealer. I have a business in Denver called Abecedarian Artists Books, which until last November was Abecedarian Art Gallery. I gave up the storefront curated space with me needing to be there several days a week, and I still curate exhibits, I still represent artists, but I no longer have a storefront. So I'm still very much involved in finding good homes for the books. All of these books here that I brought are for sale, and there's a price list up here, so if any of you are interested in knowing more about these books, then here I am, here's the books. Many of these aren't the copies that I actually sell. These are travel or display copies. I also have a very rich website that I keep things on even when they're sold out, sort of as an archive, and librarians refer to this website quite often, and it's abecedarianbooks.com. So one of the reasons that I think I am so enchanted with artist books is that I have a short attention span. I like to learn a little bit about a lot of things, and to that end I'll pick a topic or decide on something that engages me, and I'll flesh it out into an idea and also a way of working with materials and a structure that I've not worked with before. So all my books look very different. So I'm going to talk about this one first. This one is called Every Step a Lotus, and this was commissioned by the Denver Art Museum. They hired me to create a work based on something in their permanent collection. So I found what's called a sutra box. It's very large, but it was gold with jewels bedecked, all over the case. And in it, it had a series of small individual leaves, they're called, that had prayers on them in a language that I'm unable to read. So I only took the structure basically, and at the same time I was recovering from a visit to the Mutter Museum in Philadelphia, which is a medical oddity museum, which I love, but there's things in there that are rather unsettling. The thing I found most unsettling was a specimen of a bound foot. So the lotus foot it's known as the lotus, and it is, the perfect lotus foot is 2 3/4 inches long, which is the distance from this to this. So this entire beautiful book, because the lotus, the bound foot tradition is so much about shoving things into a beautiful form, basically. And so beautiful box with all these rather disturbing bits of information about the and the history of the books. So the pamphlet, where is it? I had it. Oh, then also there's more explanatory material in this little book that I gathered while I was doing research for this project. So I'm not going to pass out the entire box, but I am going to go ahead and pass out some of these cards so you can get a better idea without me standing up here reading what some of the information on these. So so I also have a lot of interest in the body and tend to work in a way that explores those issues. And I think the only other book I have of mine that's a good example of that is this book. It's called Shedding. I was asked to participate in a project where you do something every day for X number of days. And let me tell you, I'm an absolute failure. I get to day 10 and I don't feel like doing the drawing or writing the poem or making the book or whatever it is. So I set a parameter for myself. I thought, what do I do every day naturally other than, breathe and sleep and drink coffee? And I thought, my body does things. My body sheds things. So this series is called Shedding, and for 21 days I retrieved something that I had shed from my body. Sometimes I intervened, like there was this is so gross, but I actually had a scab.
Yeah.
I had an injury. So happily the scab started to come off while I was in my 21 days. An eyelash on my cheek. I had to help the hair, you get these hairs on your chin. So I would pull the hair. I had wax that I cleaned out of my ears. So things like that. So they didn't just fall off. I sort of helped them. And for 21 days I did that. There's 21 copies of this book, and each one has an actual specimen embedded in the cover. So this one is the shredded pinky. And then they all have the same text. So what I did is I scanned the artifact and magnified at 500% and had a photograph of that made. And then I presented these as little specimens with the label that is underneath with the date of collection. And then so I don't do letterpress printing, I use laser etching, and I was very limited in the amount of space that I had to fill up with text. So I wrote some very pithy text, and I'll just read you one. I have these recurring facial hairs. Not that many, but they always come back in the same place. This one sprouts on my chin every several weeks. So as you go through the book, you'll find there's other things like, there's navel residue that I retrieved from my belly button.
How far did you go?
Well, there's actually quite a bit there, but remember these are scanned at 500%. So this one off it goes. There's my handprint, a scan of my handprint on the covers, and that is deer hide that makes up the two covers because I thought that was a fitting skin for the book. So continuing with my personal stories, I was raised by a musician mother and a father who was an engineer, but that my parents met very much because of music. There was a piano concerto that my dad, when he heard on the radio when I was a kid, would say, "Ah, were it not for this piece of music, you probably wouldn't have been born." So that story is that my dad, engineering student, very shy at the University of Colorado in Boulder, heard on the radio a piece of piano music, and he had grown up in a household, Depression era. He was an orphan. He hadn't heard a lot of music. And he was dumbstruck by the beauty of this piano concerto. So he called the radio station and found out what it was, and he went and found a recording and got a phonograph and took it back to his dorm room and started playing this piano concerto. And he thought, I have to learn how to make this music. So he decided to use one of his electives and sign up for a basic piano class. And so at that time, they just had rooms with the instructor standing in front of a table, much as I'm doing here, and students would line up to register for the class. And there was one woman whose line was long. She was gorgeous, and you know where this is going. This was my mom. So he waited in line. Her class was full long before he got to the front of the line. She kept turning people away. When he came to the line, she gave him the last remaining space.
Oh my God.
She waited. He's a terrible student. He was tone deaf. She waited all semester. She had marriage proposals, and she waited, and he still hadn't asked her out. So she finally asked him out, and they had a nice picnic on Flagstaff Mountain, and then, of course, they got married and have 5 children, and I'm one of them. For her 40th birthday present, he made her a harpsichord. Mm-hmm. And he made it from a kit, and it was a horrible design. It sounded beautiful. He made a lot of refinements, but it was heavy, and they called it Old Wally. He retired from his job as an engineer and pursued instrument building full-time and made 51 more instruments. So this piece of artwork tells a little bit about their story, but it uses other people's stories as well. That moment of connection, I call it, not just love at first sight, but that moment of recognition that something has impacted you profoundly. And the Greeks called this theomania, madness of the gods, and that's the title of this piece. And a friend of mine who I've collaborated on many projects with, and I collected stories on answering machines that people told us. And she's a writer, and she pared them down into a text, and then we took photographs that we thought well represented some of the snippets from their tales. And so we collected these stories anonymously, And there were two significant stories in addition to my parents that didn't meet this format that I'd also been told. So I hired an actor and an actress to read those stories, and they're on this CD, as well as music, a musical piece composed by a sound producer that for each track uses the answering machine tapes. It's beautiful. And then it has some recordings of my mom playing the piano. Not the harpsichord, but the piano. And then this is a little recipe book for love potions. Here are some actual herbs, etc., that you can use to make a love potion. There's a little bit about the book that's on this tray. And then so many people helped me with this project. And this is where my love of sort of funny little structures is showing up. So I put all of their names on this little portable accordion. So I'm happy to pass around what makes sense, but I think I don't need to pass around the herbs and sachets, but you might be interested in reading more about this.
What the piano concerto was?
Yes, and it was a concerto, a Beethoven piano concerto, but I can't remember which one. It's in my notes.
I'm reading an early book by Carol Shields
Which
that
one?
includes an instance of that.
Yeah.
It's a folklorist who studies mermaids and a man who is a late night talk radio host.
I know that story.
Yeah. That's so cool.
So I've never had that moment of recognition with another person, but I hate to say, and there's actually an example that we suspect is a dog in this book. But I've had that with animals that, oh, you're the one. But just things too, like, oh, this is so profoundly beautiful. And so I think it resonates with a lot of us. Some people who said they were interested in the project said, but I'm divorced. I'm no longer with that person. It doesn't matter. This project was about that moment of connection, no matter what the end story is. So I also work as a prompt, as this piece was a prompt from another source, the Denver Art Museum. This piece was a prompt from Karen Kuntz, who has Constellation Studios in Lincoln, Nebraska, and she was hosting an exhibit called Metropolis, and artists who participated were asked to design something based on or inspired by Italo Calvino's Invisible Cities. Italo Calvino is one of my very favorite writers, and so I saw that, and even though I didn't really have time, I thought, oh, I'm in, I have to figure this out. I made a prototype that was similar to this, but it was not as well developed, and sent that for the show, and when it came back, I thought, you know, this is a good enough idea that I'd like to pursue it a little bit further. So I chose 5 of his topics, all of the ones that referenced eyes, the chapters that referenced eyes. The entire text from those chapters is reproduced on this scroll with the name of the cities that are about eyes. I don't know if any of you are familiar with this book, but
It's a small book.
yeah, it's not very long. It's the stories that Marco Polo brought back and told Genghis Khan, and he made up these stories about cities that are somewhat plausible, but of course this magical realism style. And I had this vision for this book, and then I thought, oh, I don't draw that way. What am I going to do? So I hired someone to do the illustrations for me, and she was a perfect fit, and I'm not going to pass this one around, but it will be up here for...
Cord?
It's not silk, it's, this is a synthetic cord, because, you know, there's only so much that I can have be consistent because of material practicalities. So I have only one more of mine to show off, and this is the project that I'm most immediately engaged in, and one that has me particularly excited about coming to this part of the country where you have these amazingly dense forests. In Colorado, it's a lot about sky and sunshine. And we have, you know, trees and whatnot, but nothing like here. Here it's almost suffocating to me. So a really wonderful way to present layers and layers and layers of natural world material to me is a tunnel book. So I have this series. This is the second in the series, and it's spelled M-I-N-U-T-E, which is either minute or minute. And my idea is that for about a minute, I look in a very small space and I gather all the details that are in that space, and the things that happen in a very short period of time, and I present them in a tunnel book. So these have 27 panels. Why? Because 27 is my favorite number, and they're just layers, repeating layers of small little. This was from my backyard, so.
What material do you use to construct?
This is paper that's been laser cut, but it's all been hand printed first. So every page is hand printed from a wood block, and you can see on the side are the wood block prints. And then I do go in and add it's so complicated the way I do this, but the inner insides are hand painted with acrylic and ink and a little bit of gouache.
Did you have to register the cut with something?
Yes, I did. I'm really kind of crazy you wouldn't believe how long it takes me to set these things up. So this is an ongoing, it's what's known as a variable edition. So there's several copies that are similar to this, but because they're all handmade, they're not exactly the same. And I have one in progress that has a little spider in it. So that's this kind of idea that I'm currently pretty involved with. So, are there questions about these pieces?
Your own laser cutter?
I do.
Are they expensive?
They are very. Yes, I decided when I wanted to have one that I really didn't need to buy a car for a long time. So.
Oh, that expensive.
But you have one here on Bainbridge Island, I believe. I believe Barn has laser equipment. The reality of lasers is that it's a lot of computer software that you have to know, a lot. Like who knew an artist would spend so much time sitting in front of a computer?
Has anybody done three-dimensional printed artist books yet?
Yes, there are some. I haven't seen any that really resonate with me because they're using plastic. But I also haven't seen, I see a lot, but I miss a lot. So a couple more really fabulous examples just because that sort of are along the lines of what I've been talking about include this book, and I'm not going to pass this around. This is Nebulae. It's made by an artist named Helen Hebert, and I know that she's represented, there's a piece of hers right over there. I don't know how many pieces that this institution has of Helen's. Colorado's really lucky to have Helen now because she was living in Portland for a long time, but she moved to Colorado. So I am utterly charmed by this book. She took a story that her daughter told her when her daughter was 4, I think, and did an entire book based on this story. So the story is about colors. She was eating clouds, observing Earth below, awaiting her descent. This is a story our daughter told when she was 3, that she watched us, her family, as she ate cotton candy clouds in the sky. That's the story. And so she made, she wanted to explore color. So, because book artists get to explore like 20 different things in one piece. So there's 5 copies of this that go through 5 color spectrums. This is the red copy. There's a blue and a yellow and a green, and I'm not sure about the other one.
Is it hand
So those are
stitching?
hand stitched.
Yes! Crazy! It's paper that she made. She made all this paper for the purpose of this book. That's her main thing, is she makes paper. She was having so much fun figuring out ways to pigment her pulp, these intense
So
colors.
those are clumps of pigmented.
Yes, that are couched or cooched into the paper.
Oh, wow.
Can you stand it? So it's an honor as a person representing artist books to get to actually know about this object and get to explore it tactily. But again, I'm going to have it up here, but I'm not going to pass it around.
I've seen this on, I've seen some people who are starting to stitch into paper more on Pinterest.
Yeah, she's always willing to try new things as long as it involves paper. So another artist who's doing really beautiful handmade. So these, I'm now talking a little bit about limited editions that are variable, that the artist has gone ahead and made multiple copies even though they're not relying on mechanized production. So obviously many of my books have that quality, and so does Helen Hebert's. This book is also a limited edition by Jan Owen. Do you have anything by Jan? She's a calligrapher, and she lives in Belfast, Maine. And I've met her, she's just delightful, and I have these romantic ideas about her spending the winter in Belfast, Maine, working on her calligraphy, which evidently aren't that far, that's not that big of a stretch. I love this book because this is her response to the troubled times that she was experiencing prior to the November election. So it's not, you would never guess that this beautiful object was inspired by such anguish. But what she has to say about it is that, maybe I don't have that. John Milton was my antidote to the 2016 presidential election. He lived through a time of great change, political intrigue, and personal hardships. While there are days now when Satan seems to walk and tweet among us and knowledge is trivialized, Milton gives me hope. So we can choose to use our response to whether it's personal anguish, national, international, whatever, how we choose to react to that as people who work in the studio. We have more options, I think, or different options, and the options that can result in something that is just so magnificently powerful. I mean, I just tear up when I think about this as her response. So, Milton Marginalia, hand-lettered. She also loves binary code, so she rewrites all her text in binary code. So this is from Paradise Lost. And I will hand this around. And I'll keep it in the box because that's where a lot of this extra information is. Another response to something painful, very much more personal, but something that many of us have experienced or will likely experience in our life, and that's the loss of a parent, a mother in particular. This is by Ingrid Porter, and again, it is, each piece is hand-crafted, hand-painted, but it's an edition of, I believe, 6. And I'm going to just let you experience this on your own. So go ahead and just go through that, and that's a little bit better than me talking about it. So another hotbed of discussion right now is the environment. I know it's a big topic here on Bainbridge Island. everywhere. There's a lot more people wanting to use these beautiful spaces in the world than there seems reasonable room to accommodate everyone's needs. This book, called The River Has No Ego, is made by a woman who's a librarian and her partner who's a sculptor. They live in the Bay Area, Mary Marsh and Tony Belivar. And it's letterpress printed. And he has a permit to take backpacking groups into Yosemite, and these permits are not easy to get. So what they do is they take groups backpacking into Yosemite with watercolor kits, and they give plein air painting workshops while they're backpacking in Yosemite, which I love. So The River Has No Ego is a text that reflects on rivers, a particular river, I believe. I apologize, I only got this a few days ago, so I haven't really explored it, but it could reference just about any wild river, it looks like. Really beautiful. And because he is a sculptor, I think she hand cuts the cutout. Then the work that they do collaboratively ends up in these beautiful, beautiful boxes.
Is every artist bookmaker obsessive compulsive?
Is what?
Is every artist bookmaker obsessive compulsive?
No. Where did you get that idea? I am going to pass this around, but I'm going to ask that you look at it and leave it on the table as you're going through it. And it opens on a direction that you wouldn't expect. And I also am not going to pass around the case because that just kind of will get in the way. Now, for no other reason than I'm absolutely enchanted with the work of Barry McCallion, I'm just going to show you two of his books. Another artist who lives in upper state New York, and I think he has a lot of time that he gets to spend in his studio. He's elderly, and he makes these one-of-a-kind books that are inspired and often include some of his favorite texts. So this is Dylan Thomas's poem, Fernhill. It's a one-of-a-kind.
His name is?
Barry McCallion. And so he actually hires someone to bind his books and make the cases because he's more interested in the interior components, the illustration and the text, than he is in actually making the books. So this one has transparent pages. So when you open the first page, you get access to a lot of the content before you even turn the pages to get into it. And every page has some, is a selection from the text with his illustration. So again, this one is pretty easy for you to just look at when it's going around. Now, he also provides this sheet that says, use me to see. Now, isn't that brilliant? So you can, if you want to look at just one of the spreads without interference from behind, you can. It took me a while to figure out what use me to see meant, but that's what it means.
Did he say what he uses for glue to?
I have a lot of that information, but I don't get too involved in answering those questions. Because
Proprietary?
no, it's just there's so many other fun things to talk about. Yeah.
So you commented that he chooses to have someone else make his box.
Mm-hmm.
Do most of the artists make their own boxes or
Yeah.
containers?
Most of us, I think, that are doing the kind of work that I have with me, they're very limited in size, in number of publications. But many of us do hire out things so that we can actually have a better product. I couldn't do my own drawings, so I hired someone to do my drawings. Helen Hebert has little stitching parties, and so she'll have people come and help sew things together. A lot of us have wisened up, I think, and because we can't be good at everything. We're already asking ourselves to be so skillful in a broad array. But usually artists' books that's part of the sort of definition, if it's not always 100%, is that one person or a small collaborative team is overseeing the entire production. Although he may have hired someone to do parts of his project, it's by under his direction.
Right. Now, the metal box that you used, did you just happen upon that, or did you
Well, I ordered
specifically-
those. They're made in India.
Ah.
And they come with 24 of those little round boxes. So now I have all these little round boxes that I'm doing different things with. This is another one of Barry's. And this does not have text. This one is inspired by this is making me so sad I can't remember. Autumn Rhythms, or is this Autumn Rhythms?
Yeah.
Is the name. And it's based on a really famous artwork. Let's see what he has to say about it. The title is taken from Jackson Pollock's painting, but I thought it was inspired by Kandinsky's imagery. Yeah, so I think it's a combination thing going on here. No text. Now, this one he hired someone to make the box, but he did do his own book production. It's very simple in that it's not even sewn. There's just a folio of pages that are too deep. And he gave me, it arrived and I said, Barry, I can't figure out what order these are supposed to go in. Do you care? And he said, no, he said, I do care. Would you please hand number them? And I haven't hand numbered them yet. So I think I'm not going to pass this around because they need to stay in the order that they're in. But I will show you a couple more of the spreads. So this is how it looks, when it's all fully assembled, and then you open this and it changes significantly, and you open it again, and again you have that experience. And I love what's happening on the back side, this buildup of shapes. So. Almost didn't bring this because I thought, oh no, I didn't do my numbering job. What if the pages get out of order? But I'm glad I did. It's so fun to show off.
Paper, the pages, or is the
Yeah, there is foil.
sheets of.
Yeah, he supported himself in the graphic design industry for a number of years, so he's got really good graphic design sense, and also is comfortable using things like that metal foil.
What was his name again?
Barry McCallion, McCallion. He is very underrepresented on the internet. I carry his work, as does Priscilla Javelis, but other than that, I don't think anybody else has it. And she has a good website too. I don't know if you know her. She's from Maine. Now, I don't know how much more time I have. I have a zillion more books to show. So now I'm just going to start bringing out zingers, and you can ask me questions. I don't always have a lot to say. This is made from somebody who I got to work with a lot early in my career. She no longer makes books. Her name is Laura Waite, and now she makes paintings. She does conservation bindings, so her books are really, they function beautifully. A lot of us book artists, I'm not a book binder. I know how to put things together in a way that makes sense to me, but it's not binding by any means. So she's a trained binder, so her books are very well engineered in that they function beautifully. So here's another book. These books are both about personal experience in two different ways. This book is called 1,000 Starlings. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Rhiannon Alpers. Do you have something by hers? It seems like you maybe do.
But I'm
Yeah.
I don't have a visual.
Well, let me just back up. What she has been making for the past several years are works that are inspired by her her moment of connection was with a woman whose name is Marion Sybil. What is her name? She was an untrained botanist, and Maria Sibella Marians, and she's kind of taught herself how to do plant illustration pre-Darwin. And she was traveling around in exotic places and doing very detailed drawings of she had this moth that she was really fascinated with the life stages of this moth. And so Rhiannon has been working from publications by this Maria Sibelius for many years. And so this is one of her pieces. And I love this book. It's a variable edition. There's 20 in this series. All of them use the same letterpress printed book. So she's figured out a way to do, she believes in the importance of letterpress in book arts. So she's letterpress printed the text, which repeats from book to book. And then on the last page, she presents the information that's specific to this particular selection of specimens. So, this is, again, not one I'm going to pass around, but so this is Rihanna's work that I know about, these natural history box kinds of things. Well, then she had a baby. So now, this is her next project. It's called 1,000 Starlings. It's in this really lovely binding, which is known as the Secret Belgian binding. And it's a description of how some of the things that were going on in her body while she was pregnant. Imagine a night sky wide open, enveloped in netting. You peer through tiny openings patterned like crisscrossed constellations. So she was having a conversation with her unborn child, and this book presents it beautifully. And I'm shocked that she actually can even keep making books with this newborn. I think her baby's about a little over a year now, but she just published this last year. So this is another one that it's fun to pass around. And this book is called When I Fly, and this is a collaboration that in my personal lexicon, I think of collaborations differently than what we were talking about earlier. So instead of hiring someone to do a certain aspect of the book arts, this group developed the project together and produced it together. So for me, this is a collaboration. My hiring of someone to do the drawings is not a collaboration. That was just a relationship that I had with a vendor almost, with an independent contractor. So again, this just arrived, so I haven't fully explored it, but it's about flying dreams, I believe. And it's pressure printed with a lot of letterpress printed text, and it's by 3 artists who live in the Bay Area. Lisa Rappaport, Brian Kring, and the other woman I think did the writing, and I don't know her. So in closing, it just says, when I was an adolescent, I would often have the following recurring dream. I find a bottle of pills. There are red pills, yellow pills, blue pills, and 1 black pill. I always choose the black pill. Then the air turns thick, magnetic, and yellow. I can fly through it. It is a flight more like swimming than flying. There are no vertiginous, who knows if I said that word right? Vertiginous vistas to be seen. Everything is murky. I can only fly short distances through the thick air. This is not something light and liberating, but low and sinister. So that's the closing text for this book. guess I can start getting.
Can I'm hoarding these because I want to ask you questions about the construction.
Mhm.
But I can do that later if you.
Well, maybe everybody else would like to know too.
Okay. Is this wood or is it just double thick bookboard?
I think it's double thick
Bookboard.
bookboard with a cavity.
Yeah.
So it's probably even more than double thick because I had to put a glass mounted slide
So
in
it's
there.
not two pieces.
It is it's at least 2 pieces.
Yeah,
It might
okay,
even be
okay,
more.
okay,
Yeah.
Great. And then the other question I have, which I think is wonderful, this is the first time I've seen a drum leaf construction done with absolute beautifully done creases instead of just gentle folds. But it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And so my only question is, why did you choose to do this as opposed to thread binding? Because you're not a binder.
Well, no, that's a great question, and I'm glad that you are, or looked at this closely enough because I didn't want any stitching. Yeah, and because I'm really interested in what I call stiff leaf binding or rigid page binding. I like really thick pages, and they don't usually work with sewn structures. Yeah. Now, the downside of the way that I've approached this book is that it doesn't fully open, but this is a spring back, so it does this instead. So I made that choice too, and I think to have this be effective, you need pretty thick, stiff pages.
Not a drawback.
Right, right. So it was a decision, but it doesn't open as well as other books that are drum leaf bound would. Okay, and then
this one, I am fascinated by your construction.
yes.
It's brilliantly done. I've actually seen some things like this before, but this is just beautiful.
Well, thank
And so-
you, but it's not original.
No, I know it's not original, but it's beautifully done, and the way you've used it to intersperse 3D with the print, I love.
Well, so do you know who developed this structure?
No, I don't.
Claire Van Vleet, who's another one who has gone down a different road of recognition. So Claire Van Vleet, and I think I have this right, I've been corrected a couple times, but I think I have it right now. She won a MacArthur Genius Fellowship, and she was the first woman working in the book arts field to get awarded a MacArthur Genius Fellowship, and this was quite a long time ago. Now, you probably have more name familiarity with Haidie Kyle. And Haidie Kyle has gone down a different road. She's much more of an educator. She's very generous. Claire is too in a different way, but Haidie is very generous with her structures. And she has these great names for her structures, like the Blizzard book that was named because she got stuck home from work one day and developed the folding styles, and we're doing the Blizzard book tomorrow for any of you who are in my class tomorrow. But Claire Van Vleet names her books after projects. So this may be Landscape with Cows, but I can't remember. So Claire Van Vleet never writes her own text. I unfortunately don't have anything of hers, but you probably do. She always uses the text that someone else has written, and sometimes she gets to work with that other writer and they develop a project together, but sometimes she has permission and she does whatever she wants, but she has a great respect for the author's craft, and so she doesn't change the text. She respects line spacing and things of that sort. And she also is a paper maker, and she makes all her own paper and does all her own printing. She's now probably 80, she's in her mid-80s. She's still hard at it. And here's one thing about Claire. There's two things that I'm a pretty good friend of hers, and when she was deciding where to set up her bindery, and this was long before Google, this was before the internet, she gathered information about where is the cheapest piece of property she could live on that would give her access to what she needed. And Wisconsin was one place and Vermont was the other. And so she chose a part of Vermont that's known as the Northeast Kingdom. I mean, how could you not choose the Northeast Kingdom? And she hasn't moved. This is another one of her keys to success. She is so focused on her studio craft and her commitment to work. She doesn't move. She does all her work on this land that she has, and she's able to sustain herself by keeping her overhead very low. She's a remarkable, I don't know how much teaching she's still doing, but I got to work with her for a couple weeks decades ago, and it was transforming. The other thing she told me when I first met her was, she said, yes, I drive old cars, and what I do is I save 10 cents a mile for every mile that I drive, and then I have a savings account for my next car, so I don't ever have to borrow money to buy a car. Well, you know what? I have followed that path. It's more than 10 cents a mile now. But I just love this really practical approach. It's a little bit about, I think it's Walker Percy says, you know, keep your home life orderly, or keep your personal affairs orderly so that you can go crazy in your creative life. And I think, you know, that's good advice. It's hard for book artists. Yeah. Yeah.
That said that?
Walker Percy.
Alicia, the book in the upper left is studies.
There
I mean,
are
sorry,
Claire's.
Claire's.
Yeah, so that is one of her books in the top left.
And Peter Schumann, they have some relationship with bread and puppets there.
Oh yeah.
Because they live
That's
in
in
Vermont.
Glover, that's in the Northeast Kingdom too.
Northeast
Yeah.
Kingdom.
So good. So you have something else to look at. And you, the audience may already know the answer to this question, but is the collection available to visitors of things that aren't out, like by making an appointment?
Here,
Okay,
yes.
yeah. So that's a good way to see some of these things that I've referenced if you live nearby. You're lucky ones if you do.
It's 9 minutes.
Oh, okay. So let's see, I don't want to miss my chance to talk about these two books. They're so perfect. So Sarah Nichols is another artist that I really admire. She loves to do research about a certain topic, and she immerses herself fully in her research. So she does residencies every once in a while. And I'm not sure if this book, Glass House, was inspired by a residency, but it's the history, basically, of greenhouses. So she's a letterpress printer. She ran the print shop at this New York Center for Book Arts for many, many years. And about 3 years ago, she got to step down from that position. And now she's full-time in her studio. So she did not make this paper, but it seems to be handmade paper. She does she just is such a wonderful drawer. She does linoleum cuts. Her color sense is amazing. And then she inserts text, and she has this really great conversational style with her text. So it's informative, but not, I mean, she draws from a lot of scientific sources, but it's very lay person friendly. Collectors were especially obsessed with orchids. The expense of finding, gathering, or stealing, and then transporting delicate flowers from around the world became a popular extravagance in the 19th century. And then she can go on and talk in a little bit more depth about orchids, but mostly she gets to do these illustrations that are just over the top. Now, Sarah, as a kind of a bread and butter project, she lives in Brooklyn. She has high overhead, just living expense-wise, has a series called, and it's the Telegraph, I can't remember the name of the series, but it's a subscription. So you pay a very nominal fee, and you get 3 publications every year. They're letterpress printed, pamphlet stitched, and they're about funny little things that she stumbles across while she's researching her bigger projects. I think it's $45 a year, and they just show up in the mail. And I encourage all of you to subscribe to her project.
Now, who's this?
Her name is Sarah Nichols, and I can pull up the exact, it's through Etsy. So I can pull up the exact
Why did I write down camera?
camera. I don't know.
Sorry.
I don't know. You could make a book about that. Oh, I'm not going to pass around this case because it's kind of heavy, but I'm happy to pass this book around. And then the quickest forever, look at this beautiful bag. Inga Brueggemann, she's working now in Reno, Nevada. She runs the letterpress and book arts program in Reno, although she's not native to Reno. I can't remember where she's from. Her work, every aspect of her work is so beautifully considered and executed that if I live long enough, I might be able to achieve what my sense of Inga Brueggemann's approach to book arts is. So just everything is so over the top.
What's her name again?
Inga, I-N-G-E, Brueggemann, B-R-U-G-G-M-A-N. She doesn't have a lot of publications, but they're all beautiful. The Quickest Forever. And then you get to things like this page. There's actual sewing in here. Do you have some of hers, Inga Brueggemann? She hasn't done a lot. She's very busy teaching and honing her craft. So I'm suspicious that 9 minutes is very nearly up. 4 to go. Okay. Does anybody have any burning questions?
How many books in a series usually?
How long is a ball of string,
Oh, okay.
piece of string?
So there's no.
But yes, go ahead. On that note, I will just say that for my own lexicon, and I think it's not universal but pretty close, when I say artist's book, I'm usually referring to a one-of-a-kind publication, so a unique work. Then, like Barry's work is a unique book. Then there's limited edition artists' books, and most of these are limited edition artists' books that I brought with me today. And then there's limited edition artists' books where the edition is variable. And I'm seeing a lot more of this. And I love that book artists are so happy to embrace the variable edition, because printmakers are a little bit fussy. They think things need to be as close to identical as possible. So this is an example, as is my Minute Minute and The Grief and several others, where the basic format and the materials and perhaps the text are pretty much the same, but for various reasons, some of the selections or the actual artifacts presented are slightly different from copy to copy. Or just when things are handcrafted, there's quite often, it's impossible, and why would you want to make everything seemingly identical? Because as Keith Smith said, they're never going to be the same. They're two different objects. They can't, even if they look identical, they're two different objects, so they're always going to be different. So, any other questions? So I'm not sure what protocol is here, but I'm happy, I do need to pack things up, but I'm happy to have you look at some of the things I was less willing to pass around. I can perhaps put them on the table as I'm packing up if you want to look at things more closely.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
This was terrific. Thank you.